Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 29th of April 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. We will be joined by live Skype link by David Scott from Northern Exposure, who has just returned from Israel and is back north of the border. Well, the weather is quite interesting. It's very cold here in Plymouth, but quite sunny. So we're doing quite well. Perth was a blizzard last night and I understand is not too good today. Hampshire, Shropshire, sunshine, London overcast, and Hampshire just a bit cloudy apparently. Global warming, Mike.
Possibly. Where are we starting? Ian Crane. Ian Crane was in court yesterday. And one interesting fact that came out during the court case was that apparently he has been experiencing surveillance. It says that this is from the Drill or Drop website, and if you've got any interest in the anti-fracking campaigns, which we probably all should have, that is a great website to go and get news. So what it's saying here is an opponent of shale gas was under surveillance for his role in anti-fracking protests. The High Court in London was told this morning. The evidence was revealed at the latest hearing of a long-running legal dispute between the campaigner Ian Crane and the oil company Rathlin Energy. Mr. Crane referred to a statement signed by David Corcoran, described as a close protection officer working for the security and investigations company Tutus Concepts. In the statement submitted in evidence by Rathlin Energy, Mr. Corcoran wrote, "Mr. Ian Crane is a well-known protester and has been under surveillance in connection with protests against fracking. Through this surveillance, I became aware that Mr. Crane was to be found at Preston taking part in a protest, and of course this was with a view to serving papers." Ian was seeking to set aside £35,000 in court costs and also the costs of an eviction. Well, interestingly, Brian, yesterday's court case added another £7,000 or so to the alleged debt that he owes. So, unfortunately, he lost the case because the judge was pretty intransigent, really.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation that we're now in. You go into a court where you're not judged by a jury of your peers. You're simply judged by a judge, many of whom make up their own rules as they go along, and of course, licensed to print money for anybody in the legal field. So, was it an open and honest court case, or was there some backhanders going on? We've no way of knowing.
No way of knowing.
Closed court, really.
This is resulting in a bankruptcy hearing, and that's going to take place on the 4th of May. I would imagine that Ian would appreciate quite a bit of support at that. We'll get the details out as soon as possible.
Okay.
And at this point, I suppose we say welcome to David Scott and the Scott's word of the week, David.
Yes, Tatty Hauker. Tatty Hauker means potato picker. If you are careful in listening to the singing in the drinking scene in The Great Escape, you'll hear the Scottish characters singing "Wha saw the Tatty Haukers" to one another. Now, the reason Tatty Hauker is the word of the week this week is the named person scheme has revealed that the named person, the state, is going to be the chief gardener, and the flowers are going to be the children. So we assume that by a process of elimination, that parents are now reduced to tatty haukers.
Excellent.
More on that later, I believe.
Yes, indeed, more on that later. But let's get to the sort of main subject of today, which of course is this so-called civil war over anti-Semitism within the Labour Party. And of course, it's not a civil war, is it? It's no more a civil war than there's a civil war going on in Syria, because there's so much external influence going on here. It's unbelievable. So I wanted to highlight this from the Times to set a bit of context. This is from their editorial today. Labour's leader gives scant evidence of ever having talked with people who disagree with him. On foreign policy, he tenaciously holds to convictions that are untouched by evidence or expertise. It's a shibboleth of the modern life that Israel is a colonialist enterprise and it's pernicious nonsense. Jewish statehood is one of the great expressions of the movement for national self-determination. With the genocide of European Jewry in the mid-20th century, it became a cause of humanitarian necessity. Israel has managed to be not only the refuge for Jewry, but a bastion of democratic politics, secularism, and the rule of law in a region that is short of those values. Well, we'll talk about that in a second. But of course, a lot of the controversy has come over comments made by Ken Livingstone. Well, what did he actually say? He said that when Hitler won his election in 1932, his policy was that Jews should be moved to Israel. He was supporting Zionism. That was before he went mad and ended up killing 6 million Jews. But the simple fact is that Naz, and he was referring to his colleague who made some comments along these lines, the simple fact is that Naz made these comments when there's another brutal attack by the Israelis on Palestinians. And there's one stark fact which virtually no one in the British media ever reports, and that is the death toll is usually 60 to 100 Palestinians killed for every Israeli. Before we comment on that last assertion, the assertion that is doing most of the damage, it seems, is this notion that Hitler and Zionism had anything in common. But of course they did, because in fact there were a number of Zionist factions in the 1930s. Speaking to Hitler, one was the Stern Gang, and the other was the German Zionist Federation, who eventually agreed the Havara Agreement. Yes. So David, was Ken Livingstone wrong to say what he said?
Well, some of it was wrong, but some of it was right. The allegation that has caused all the fuss, that there was a link and a working partnership in some ways, or certainly a degree of cooperation between National Socialism in Germany and Zionism, is most certainly true. For the best example of that, the best revelation of that I've seen, is in fact Hannah Arendt's book called The Banality of Evil, which I'd recommend should be essential reading. Now, this follows the Eichmann trial and follows the case all the way through as to how the relationship between National Socialism and organised Jewry, and particularly Zionism, changed and morphed over the years. Now, it's quite clear there was a lot of close working relationships at various times between the Jewish leadership and particularly the Zionist leadership. The National Socialists in Germany saw the Zionists as their natural allies amongst the Jewish population. They worked with them quite happily, and they actually seemed to quite like and respect them in many ways, seeing them having similar nationalist and socialist ideas to the Germans themselves. A couple of things. The Havara Agreement, the transfer agreement, was a means by which, although the Jews were prevented from leaving Germany with assets to as the Germans thought, to prevent capital flight from Germany, the one exception for that was if they were going to emigrate to what was then called Palestine. They were allowed to divest themselves of capital in Germany by buying German goods and manufactured equipment, and then transfer that to Palestine and where it could be sold. So bizarrely, the major German export market during the period in the immediate run-up to the Second World War was actually British Mandate Palestine. There was also, as you mentioned, other connections with Jewish and Zionist groups and leadership. And one thing that comes out of the Banality of Evil book that got a lot of criticism directed at Hannah Arendt, who was very brave in telling the truth, was that the Jewish leadership in Germany were craving and were cooperating with the Nazis. And without that cooperation, what's now known as the Holocaust really couldn't have been organised. And that the Jewish population were really behaved in a very fine and noble manner, and the Jewish leadership betrayed them in many ways. So that sort of part of the story is an important part of the story. And it's important to know, it's important to be able to tell the truth about this and not simply cover it up and have people shouted down as an anti-Semite whenever they raise these issues.
Well, that's exactly what's happening, of course, and many people speaking out against this. This is Tom London tweeting today. It's very simple. Anti-Semitism is vile and always unacceptable. Criticism of Israel is legitimate. Some people confuse, and some people do so deliberately. And of course, this is a key part of how the truth is hidden in some respects, because any criticism of Israel is couched in this language of anti-Semitism. It's that is there to kill free speech or kill the truth of what is going on in that country.
Absolutely, and just as here, we are not our government, and our government is not us. Um, that's equally, and perhaps even to a greater extent, true in Israel. You have a situation where, if you have a reaction, a popular reaction to some crime by some part of the Jewish elite, say, and the people they then suffer as the Jewish population at large, we're now not allowed to recognise the failures or crimes of that elite that brought the reaction, because that's saying, oh, the Jews brought it on themselves and you can't say that. You have to remember this is a diverse culture, a diverse society. Just as here we might suffer as a nation for the crimes of our leaders, then that's equally true in Israel and in broader Judea, if you want to use the term, throughout the world. And the people who do the crimes and the people who do the suffering are not usually the same people.
Indeed. I was quite interested to see even the BBC getting involved in this. And is this a bit of desperation here, Brian, do you think? Because that they're trying to keep a lid on this whole issue, because obviously this is now being discussed in the mainstream. And they have this article, what is the difference between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism? They're saying things like anti-Semitism is hostility and prejudice directed against Jewish people. Zionism refers to the movement to create a Jewish state in the Middle East, corresponding to the historic land of Israel. Anti-Zionism opposes that, but some say Zionist can be used as a coded attack on Jews, while others say the Israeli government and its supporters are deliberately confusing anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism in order to avoid criticism.
I think it's a skew article, Mike, because of course what the BBC is never going to do is really discuss what Zionism is. So if you look at that, that's got a heavy skew back onto the fact, even if you use your criticism of Zionism in the wrong way, that is actually anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
I believe
I would point out that paradoxically that if you look at the early Zionist texts, the texts from the late 19th, early 20th century, as Zionism was being established, these are often openly anti-Semitic. They're saying there's a problem with the Jewish people. The Jewish people are parasitical. It's extremely critical of Jews as a race, as a nation. It's openly anti-Semitic. Now, what it goes on to say is, and there's a reason for this, it's not their fault, the reason is there's no land, and therefore what we have to do is form a new country called, a new country for Jews, and if they have their own land, they will become essentially a nation like any other. That was the original core of Zionism.
Well, the Jewish Socialist Group have put out a statement today, and I'm just going to read a little bit of this. They're saying anti-Semitism exists and must be exposed and fought against in the same way that other forms of racism by all who are concerned with combating racism and fascism. Anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism are not the same. Zionism is a political ideology which has always been contested within Jewish life since it emerged in 1897, and it is entirely illegitimate for non-Jews as well as Jews to express opinions about it, whether positive or negative. Not all Jews are Zionists, not all Zionists are Jews. They say criticism of the Israeli government policy and Israeli state actions against Palestinians is not anti-Semitism. Those who conflate criticism of Israeli policy with anti-Semitism, whether they are supporters or opponents of Israeli policy, are actually helping the anti-Semites. We reject any attempt from whichever quarter to place legitimate criticism of Israeli policy out of bounds. Accusations of anti-Semitism are currently being weaponised to attack Jeremy Corbyn-led Labour Party, with claims that Labour has a problem of anti-Semitism. This is despite Corbyn's long-standing record of actively opposing fascism and all forms of racism, and being a firm supporter of the rights of refugees and of human rights globally. And they go on to say the attack is coming from four main sources who share agendas: to undermine Jeremy Corbyn as leader of Labour, to defend Israeli government policy from attack, however unjust, racist and harmful towards the Palestinian people, and to discredit those who make legitimate criticisms of Israeli policy or Zionism as a political ideology. As anti-racist and anti-fascist Jews who are also campaigning for peace and justice between Israelis and Palestinians, we entirely reject these cynical agendas that are being expressed by the Conservative Party, conservative supporting media in Britain and pro-Zionist Israeli media sources, right-wing and pro-Zionist elements claiming to speak on behalf of the Jewish community, and opponents of Jeremy Corbyn within the Labour Party. We stand against anti-Semitism, against racism and fascism, and in support of refugees. We stand for free peace and open debate on Israel, Palestine and Zionism. I thought that was pretty well worded.
Well, it is, and of course, Mike, what it proves is that all this business that there's no diversity of views in Israel is completely wrong. We'll be mentioning the BBC in a form a little bit later in the news, but the BBC, what's the BBC's job? To stir up trouble, and I believe we're now looking at a massive attempt to actually shut down the Labour Party, because that'll bring us into a one-party state.
David, do you think this is going to backfire?
I'm not sure that it'll backfire. It's a very muddy area. It's a very difficult area to get a handle on, because Jewish identity and Jewishness is such a difficult term, in some ways a slippery term. Does it refer to a national movement? Does it refer to a nation, a race? Does it refer to a religion? Or does it refer to a culture? And at various times it will refer to all of these things. And people who wish to cause trouble or wish to pursue a particular agenda will slip between one definition and the other, and to make accusations or to defend their position and to deflect criticism, even though it might be entirely valid.
I was just going to say, this is actually the key thing, isn't it, David? That when we come to people who've got a malevolent agenda, they can call themselves what they like. They can drift in and out of organisations because they don't have any scruples as to what they're actually doing. And I'll just put this one in because I know I've been staggered at the way that some Christians seem unable to deal with some of the words in the Bible, where of course it says, "Beware those who call themselves Jews but are not," and that is also translated by some Christian groups as being anti-Semitic if you use that phrase, but the wording itself says they call themselves one thing, but they're not that. It's a very passionate topic. We've got to have free speech, otherwise we're lost.
You have to have free speech. You have to have, as far as possible, precise speech as well. But you have to be able to tell the truth. And the problem with the tag anti-Semitic and the like racist is it's an end to discussion. It's an end to actually exploring issues, and that goes that doesn't help the truth. It just builds and stokes trouble for later on.
Okay, well, let's talk about more general Israel issues. What is the most important question for Israelis during Passover?
This is a slightly long piece, but please bear with me. It's worth it, okay? You've only got the headline up there. I'll need to read this to you. Last summer, the Israeli rescue service, Magen David Adom, which is Red Star of David, like Red Cross, Red Crescent, placed a rabbinical committee above it to advise on, quote, moral questions. The rabbi selected to head the committee was Rabbi Shmuel Eliyahu, Safed's chief rabbi, who's widely known for his racist views. From his lofty position as Israel's, quote, rescue rabbi, Eliyahu immediately made it clear that Megan David Adom personnel must not treat wounded terrorists, even if Army or Megan David Adom personnel order them to do so. Their obligation is to kill them or use nefarious means to lead to their death. In the occupied territories, Megan David Adams' work is done by an affiliate, Hazala Yehuda Shomron. That organisation didn't wait until the Summit Act, having already appointed its own leader. The man in that position is one of the few people even more racist than Eliyahu. Rabbi Dov Lior, head of the Yesa Rabbinical Committee on the West Bank. He's the rabbi behind the book, The King's Torah, Laws on Killing of Non-Jews, and the man who determined that the act of his disciple, Baruch Goldstein, the massacre-perpetrating doctor of the mosque in the Tomb of the Patriarchs, was, quote, holier than all the martyrs of the Holocaust, end quote. Imagine if someone in Britain had said that. And the article goes on to look at some of the lies surrounding the execution of the wounded stab attacker that we covered in the programme a little while ago. I'll read you the final paragraph. He said, this is what the real debate and struggle should be about. Not scaring people about Arabs as the existential military threats that have existed against Israel since its independence crumble one after the other, but questions of what kind of Israel we want to live in. That of Elias Coe or Yitzhak Rabin, or the racist and messianic Israel like that of Rabbis Lior and Eliyahu. On the Passover, there's no question that's more important. So what you're seeing there is a very hard-hitting piece from a point of view within Israel, fighting against an extremist view, which counts Arab life as nothing and thinks that you should brief medical teams and ambulance personnel to kill the people they're sent to treat if those people were quote-unquote terrorists. And you're seeing that being resisted within the society very robustly. You're seeing people arguing for a different sort of country. So as we're looking at these events, the tendency to tag people with these broad labels that you are Islamic or you are Jewish or you are, what were we called in the anti-name person group, libertarian, nutter Christian libertarian, right? Whatever the tag happens to be, people are people, you have to look at the ideas. Some ideas are good, some ideas are bad, and we've got to help the people who are putting forward ideas that lead to peace and thriving.
Very good. And what's going on Temple Mount?
Let's see now.
This is radical Islam's twisted trump card in their holy war against Israel.
Right. This is the piece in the Jerusalem Post. I would actually suggest people go and look this out because it's worth reading. It's a dreadful piece of journalism. It's complete propaganda start to finish, and it paints anyone who criticises Israeli policy, Israeli government policy, or IDF practice in the West Bank as the worst sort of anti-Semite, even if that person is themselves Jewish. And it's attacking the people in America and on American campuses who are themselves Jewish, and it concentrates on the New York University, which has got the greatest Jewish population of any private university in the United States. And it's criticizing them for opposing Israeli government policy. And what's interesting, one, is the way that is the language it's used. It's complete propaganda. It decries these people as every sort of betrayer, but it never actually states what the case is. It never actually fairly states what the problem is with Israeli government policy. So the people reading the Jerusalem Post, used to be called the Palestine Post, incidentally, the people reading the Jerusalem Post never get to hear a fair assessment of the other side of the argument. The other thing that's interesting is it's not working. The Jewish community in America is moving away from knee-jerk support for every Israeli policy and every IDF excess in the West Bank.
But we're getting a museum, or they're getting a museum of tolerance.
Yes, I thought just to highlight, having read an article where the ambulance service in Israel has now got a rabbi who's a racist and is telling the ambulance personnel to kill people. We are at the same time having a museum of tolerance constructed, so I thought that was quite a nice contrast.
Yes, and is this another aspect of is oil going to become a major driver for Israeli behaviour over the next period?
Well, it's possible. We covered the situation in the Golan last week, and the fact that Bibi Netanyahu has been making statements that the Golan will be forever in Jewish sovereignty. And it was pointed out to me on Twitter, so thank you for the person who did that, that yes, that was true, but there has been an oil strike, and it's alleged to be a very large, very substantial oil strike in the Golan, and perhaps that just might be influencing policy.
Quite possibly. Now, of course, you're just back from Israel, and I understand this was your local while you were there.
Yes, I drink at Putin's in Israel. I thought people would like to see that. That's the name of the pub, Putin, on the outside. And inside, in amongst all the bottles of Bacardi and Scotch, they have a little bust of Vladimir Putin. So, yeah, that's the local. And if anyone, it's on Jaffa Road, not far from the old city. So if anyone is visiting Jerusalem, I heartily recommend Putin's.
I'm glad you said it was a bust of Putin, because I did wonder whether actually he'd been pickled in vodka or something and was sitting there on the bar.
Okay, let's move on to named person, David, and GPs and housing officers now getting involved, as well as teachers and and health visitors and midwives.
Yes, research by the Named Person campaign, particularly the home educators who are very good at squirreling out bits of information the government would prefer that you didn't know, Mike. They found in minutes of meetings as they set up the Named Person scheme, discussions about how to overcome GPs' reluctance to break confidentiality rules and how to use the housing department, because if it's in council rented housing, the housing officers will be going in and seeing the families more often, how to get them to to report back to the named person on anything they see that might suggest that the well-being of the child is at risk or might in future be at risk. And of course, well-being is not defined and can mean anything.
Yes, but this seems to be continuing to break out in the mainstream press.
Yes, it's the named person. The named person issue becomes more and more central to the ongoing election in Scotland. We're seeing more and more headlines like this. Anger at SNP plans to recruit state guardians for every child to spy on Scottish parents. We're seeing information coming out about how it's not just the teachers and the named person themselves, but every aspect of the state and every aspect of the third sector, the charitable sector, that's being co-opted in to be part of the spying operation. It's very, very vast, and parents are becoming ever more alarmed.
Well, we mentioned the gardening aspect of this. The Named Person campaign has produced this little cartoon over at school. Kids told all the adults in their lives are gardeners, but the named person is the head gardener. And just to back this up, we have, I believe this is the Daily Mail. Your kids are plants, and State Snoopers, the head gardener. So this is pretty emotive language.
Well, it's the government's own language, right? All of the really embarrassing headlines in the Named Person campaign come from the government's own publications. Now, what this was 2012. It was a children's parliament, and they had 100 plus 107, I think it was, children being briefed on the named person. And rather than the deceptive and concealing language that's used in the public debate now by proponents of the named person scheme, principally by the SNP, because it was a children's audience, they had to use a simple language that actually is far more revealing as to the truth. And they said to the children that each of you is a very special plant. Imagine Scotland's a garden, and each of you is a very special plant. All the adults in your life, they're gardeners. Now, note there's no special place for parents. All the adults in your life are gardeners. And the named person, that's the head gardener. So it's quite clear who the Scottish Government thinks are in charge of families. It's a named person. It's quite clear as to what they think the parent's role is, which is just, one of the other under gardeners and do what you're told. And it's a very troubling metaphor, because you then start to say, well, what will this organisation do with what they regard as human weeds, I wonder.
Well, this is a method of describing it I haven't quite seen before, a legal monitor.
Well, yes. There are many attempts in the press, because name person, of course, is a very Orwellian sort of name, because name person doesn't say anything. It doesn't mean anything really. It's a phrase without a meaning. So the various newspapers have tried to find a way of putting it into words that actually means something. Legal monitor, well, yes, maybe. Or state-appointed guardian, much as the government hates us describing it, that's what it is.
Yeah. But Nippy has been abusing political language, has she?
Yes, this is a medium-sized article. It's not too long. It's wonderful, right? This is a Scottish Review. It's by Kenneth Roy. Please look this out and have a read. It's extremely good, extremely astute in how it views what's going on here, and the nature of the language. I'll just read the first wee bit. They said it's referring to what's in the SNP's manifesto for the Scottish Parliament elections. And Kenneth Roy says, the First Minister addresses her loyal subjects. The first paragraph of her personal statement introducing the SNP's manifesto, the first contains two assumptions. The first is that all of us who live here the first of us is that, quote, all of us who live here in Scotland love our country, end quote. Really, my own feelings grow more conflicted by the hour. There are times, this happens to be one of them, when it is tempting to unlove our country for the smugness and bloated pride of its political establishment. And it goes on from there. Please read it. It's absolutely wonderful.
Okay. Hillsborough, David, what's the National saying about this?
Well, the National
they're certainly saying that Andy Burnham had a hard time.
Yes, Andy Burnham seems to be making a point that is actually needing made. That he's recognising that the message of the Hillsborough inquiry is that the British justice system is not delivering justice.
I'm astonished to hear that. Sorry to interject there, David. I'm astonished to hear such a statement on the UK column.
But it's very surprising to hear it in the mainstream press, that it's so obvious, it's so in your face that you need to be recognising that the justice system cannot be relied upon. Or, I mean, no doubt we'll learn from this, we'll move on, we'll not make the same mistakes again, blah, blah, blah. We'll get all of those excuses. But it is clear as to what happened here.
And and what about David Crompton?
Well, he's had to resign. He's been dismissed, and he has a website which lists all of his other, or many, there will be many of his other failings and embarrassments and areas where he has not served the best interest of justice, and that's again a website I would encourage people to go and look out and read. It's David Crompton, the South Yorkshire Police Years, and we have a man here who's been in charge of many of the very worst failures amongst the English police force. And common purpose trained, of course.
Yeah. Yes.
I just wanted to say I see something deeper than just Hillsborough going on here. I think that what we've got is the deliberate exposure of the criminality that's been buried in the police and the judicial court system for many, many years. I think there's a hand of the state here in allowing this to come to the surface at this very critical time where we're seeing a massive attack on the British Constitution, the nation state, British values. If you are somebody that believes that we are being attacked by our own government, and certainly I do, it seems to me that we're now really hacking away at institutions which people, of course, have believed for many years have been doing their job. I think there's part of dismantling the nation state with this Hillsborough exposure at the moment.
It's interesting you say that because, David, you wanted us to highlight this website, the Crime Watch website, UK Plod Watch, and they're talking about TSG, the unscrupulous security company that pretends to be police. I thought it was illegal to misrepresent yourself as the police.
Well, here, yes, and the article here actually states what the law is. Any person who, not being a constable, wears any article of police uniform in circumstances where it gives him an appearance so nearly resembling that of a member of the police force as to be calculated to deceive, shall be guilty of an offence and liable on summary conviction to fine not exceeding level 3 on the standard scale. So there you go. Quite clearly, impersonating a police officer is actually unlawful, and you're not allowed to do it. And yet this company, TSG is their official name, but TSG Policing is what's on their badge. Now, that's not their proper name, registered with Companies House, because you can't use the term police or policing. It's banned in Companies House. There's a whole series of words which you're not allowed to use. So you can't call yourself Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs Limited and go and try and collect taxes from people. You're not allowed to use these phrases. You can't call yourself police or policing, and yet they do on their logo, but not on their official company name. And they have police cars, and they've got flashing blue lights on the police cars. That's not permitted either under the law, and they have even heraldic shields on their police cars that makes them look like any other police force. I think the Lord Lyon needs to look into that one.
Indeed. Now, yesterday, I'm going to ask you for comment on this in a second. Yesterday, we mentioned this new document from McKinsey and Company, diminishing returns, why investors need to lower their expectations, which is basically saying, as one of its statements, that anybody under the age of 30 can really forget about retiring or having any kind of pension, because investments aren't going to work as they have been for the last 30 years. And of course, over the months and years, I've been highlighting this situation of UK's outstanding debt, not just the so-called national debt, which is government debt, but all kinds of debt. And of course, one of the main sections in this, if not the biggest section of the pie here, is state pensions. And while this isn't money that's owed as a result of a loan specifically, it's money which is at least committed, but which is not funded at this point in time. £5 trillion in terms of state pensions and public sector pension obligations. As if to sort of highlight this, and in order to promote the idea that anybody my age, younger, or certainly 30 or younger, is never going to retire, the Daily Express front page today: work is key to a longer life. Delay retirement to slash your risk of an early death. So really, our expectations are being nudged, and we have to just get used to the idea that we're going to be working until the day we die. David?
Well, I'm not 30. I'm a smidgen off 50, and I don't expect ever to retire. I don't think that we'll see much in the way of pensions. We've got zero interest rate policy and all the rest of it, and then after a little while, we'll have worse than that, because we'll have theft, because there's only a few assets left that they can actually grab when there's the next major economic calamity. And the pension funds, 401ks in America, etc., the pension funds will be one of them. Bank accounts and bail-ins will probably also be amongst them. So I think there are major financial problems ahead, and the pension schemes are amongst are going to be at the centre of it. The government pension scheme is a giant Ponzi scheme. There are no assets. You pay in, but you're paying for the previous generation. You're not paying for yourself. And the situation is increasingly heading towards bankruptcy.
And what's your view of the looting of pension funds by private companies? BHS is the most recent example of this, but this is something that we've known about for many years. I'm sorry I've dropped that on you, but I'm hoping...
Yeah, I would need to look into that to actually speak with any authority on that. Generally speaking, what we're seeing is the relationship between a company and its staff and former members of staff, which used to be very central, has been eroded. And I think this is just another aspect of it being eroded. And it's getting ever harder to find things which are safe and secure to invest in, and there is no return. So how can, in that situation, how can anything actually thrive? How can you have a pension? And this all comes down to the creation of money in the form of debt out of nothing, which is at the heart of our system.
Indeed. Brian.
Well, I'll just pick up on the previous article there that Fern Britton on that front page said that she was going to be 60 shortly and she didn't have any worries. Well, of course, as we pointed out yesterday, that according to the NHS, the moment you're 60, you're going to be put into the very dark grey, well, shades of grey, but with a difference, because they're going to be encouraging you to have vaccinations and slowly but surely die away. So perhaps she should be a bit worried. Well, let's bring in the BBC, because of the BBC was featuring in this. It's going back to 2008, and what this article is about, an organisation called the Research, Information and Communications Unit, RICU, which had been set up as part of Whitehall's counter-terrorism organisation, and was going to target the BBC and other media organisations as part of a global, note the word, propaganda push designed to taint the Al-Qaeda brand. Well, of course, Al-Qaeda was rebranded ISIS, IS, Daesh, Al-Nusra and a few other things. But the document showed that Whitehall counter-terrorism experts intended to exploit new media websites and outlets with a proposal to channel messages through volunteers in internet forums as part of their campaign. Well, why have I got this on screen? Because it's very interesting to see people who are worried about the British government rigging the forthcoming European referendum. Certainly, I think that's going to be the case. But we've got a number of people now saying, will it be organisations like RICU that will be used by the government, teams of government-paid employees working the social networks in order to skew the vote, in order to make sure that we're locked into the European Union? Well, on one hand, we can say who knows, because this is a very complex area. So let's bring in Theresa May once again. We did a little bit of work this morning to see where that RICU was, and we're going to say at the moment we can't find any trace of it. It was still going in about 2013, but if you go to the Home Office website, if you go to the counter-terrorism website, all of a sudden RICU seems to have disappeared, and it's disappeared in this really network of stuff. So we've got Theresa May at a meeting, which we'll show you, in America, boasting about the Contest Initiative. This is one of a number of so-called anti-terrorism strategies. We've talked about Prevent, where the government is getting into schools and really accusing very young children of being potential terrorists. We've got this little organisation, the Counter-Terrorism Internet Referral Unit. We've funded an additional 1,900 officers at MI5, MI6 and GCHQ. We've got to prevent people being radicalised in the first place. So this is behavioural change, according to the government. We're going to stop you being yourself because you might be a terrorist. And Theresa May was saying that we needed other like-minded groups to come on board from all corners of the world to reduce the scope for terrorist groups. And that links through to the UN's Preventing Violent Extremism plan. Stay with it. We've got a joint unit for international counter-terrorism, which is the Home Office and the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. And that links into Five Eyes, which is an anti-terrorism collaboration between the UK, US, Canada, Australia and New Zealand. A lot of terrorism going on, Mike, actually. It's clear that the government's protecting us. His channel, Protecting and Diverting People We Know Are at Risk of Becoming Radicalised. They've had 4,000 referrals since April 2012, so they're a busy group of people. The CTIRU is working in prisons, educational institutions, communities and online to challenge terrorist propaganda and communicate an effective counter-narrative. Now that brings it into the background, because if you are anti the European Union, are you Are you a terrorist, and can the government therefore skew things? But don't worry, because Theresa says there's a double lock. You've got a Secretary of State and a judge who provide the safety system of this enormous spying. So where did she deliver this talk? Well, she was speaking at the Centre for Strategic and International Studies. And who are they? Well, I almost couldn't get it into the programme because it's too complex. Please go and have a look at their website. But we've got a gentleman like this. He's big, Mr. Pritzker. He's big in banks. He's big in top hotels. He's also connected with universities in China, but he spent 30 years on archaeological expeditions in the Western Himalayas.
His CV is spectacular, and if you read his CV, he is Superman.
He's more than Superman, because he's conducted all of these business interests while striding the Himalayas for 30 years.
Yes.
Well, if you have a look at his number 2, will she come in? Yes, here she is. We've got Linda W. Hart, and her CV is even bigger. I had to put it on video in order to show it on screen. You need to go and read it. This woman has done everything. It doesn't matter, banking, universities, business, teaching, management consultancy. And these are the people that have summoned Theresa May. What have we got here? Well, this is a list of their trustees. It gets interesting because we got some fairly senior names in the political circuit. Zbigniew Brzezinski is in there. Another one whose name has just escaped me, but you can go and look at this yourself. But remember, our Home Secretary clearly summoned in order to talk in front of these corporate interests. And just to ram the point home, let's have a look at this. We've got their donors. So this is just foundation donors. And again, it's so big. The only way we could do it is to run a little bit of a video clip here. Who are these organisations, and why are senior members of the British government briefing them on counter-terrorism? It's quite mind-boggling, Mike. It goes on and on and on. If you're not convinced by that one, here's the corporate donors, and same thing here, just a list. Of course, a lot of banks, very high-profile companies, Coca-Cola, on it goes.
So this is clearly a multi-million-pound dollar organisation.
Independent, though.
Independent.
Independent of corporate interests. Well, we'll just let that. Well, there we are. We've got to the bottom of that one, and it isn't all. But my question is, what is Theresa May doing, talking to these corporate globalist interests about security, which involves basically spying on people who the government decides could be a terrorist? It's pretty serious stuff. Well, I'll just switch over to the report that we made yesterday, which is about the NHS looking after our health by teaming up with Disney. Because it didn't take long before somebody said to us, well, of course, do you realise this? And here's CNN with a massive report about the sheer number of paedophiles who'd been working for Disney at the big children's attractions. And in this particular clip, they're talking about 35 paedophiles who were freely operating within Disney's management or employee structure. And nothing for us to worry about.
Of course, many people within the child protection, professionals within the child protection arena have pointed out in the past that if you look at the body of child pornography on the internet, a significant proportion of it appears to have been filmed or photographed in Disney hotels, at Disney theme parks, because the children are taken there as a reward for the other activities.
Yeah. And on
despicable.
Top of that, there are a very large number of films showing what appears to be embedded pornographic images within the very Disney cartoons that are being put out to the public. So we think there's some questions to be answered from the top tier of the NHS over who decided that a partnership with Disney would be good for our health. On that very serious note, we'll end, and we'll say that with the bank holiday weekend coming up, we thought it would be good to end on a happy note. I've chosen two pictures here. One of these has been taken by David himself during his time in Jerusalem. David, would you like to just tell us about this photo you took? I think it's a wonderful photo.
Yes, that's the front elevation of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is on Temple Mount, which is the former location of the Jewish temple, and currently it's occupied by Al-Aqsa Mosque and by the Dome of the Rock, which is the large golden dome that you see in all the photographs. But the mosque is actually the one with the lead dome, and that's what you see in front of you there.
Right, and just wonderful to see the trees and the sunshine, of course. And on that theme, we hope that everybody has a very good weekend. We want to thank everybody for all the support that they've given us. We will be back on Tuesday, the 3rd of May. And on the subject of that, just like to remind people that May is nearly upon us. And
That is a horrible image, Brian.
pardon?
That is a horrible image, that May is nearly upon us.
Well, she is nearly upon us, and she is no lightweight, that's for sure. David, would you like any final comment from north of the border?
Would just like to finish by saying that we're seeing more and more things coming out of investigating into the named person scheme. We're now finding we're making links with other groups that are being investigating other areas, and we are starting to join the dots. The government have a publication called Joining the Dots, which is meant to be saving children, and it's doing nothing of the sort. But we are starting to join the dots, and that's something we look forward to being able to explore with you in more detail now later on in the news, and perhaps in other ways as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, that brings us to the end of today's news. Thank you all very much for joining us. A special welcome to our viewers in San Francisco. I'm told they watch this news at breakfast time due to the time difference, obviously. Viewers now from across the world, so thank you very much for joining us. We'll be back.
And on Facebook.
And on Facebook, of course. Mike has recently embedded live video stream, so a big hello to people now watching through Facebook. We'll be back same time Tuesday at, well, that's 1 o'clock. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.